talk about care, impact, ISNA, ICNA as part of the radical Islam paradigm. And this is quite significant because it has, in this white nationalist reassertion, I don't think they're there yet where they believe that it is necessary to cleanse the West of non-whites. And that's a material difference between white nationalism in the West and fascism in the 1940s in Europe. But rather, what a theme that runs through their writings, and even in recent attempts to pass laws that censor free speech, especially criticisms of Israel, whether in California or at the federal level, is do not, if you remain here, you must realize that you must remain here powerless, without teeth. You will let you live here, but you must live here recognizing our supremacy and our superiority, not just civilizationally, not just ideologically, but as well as not attempt to challenge us politically. So any attempt to become politically active is seen as a threat. And that is why immediately they point to any politically active Islamic organization or entity as a danger, and often will claim that it has ties to the Muslim Brotherhood or to the international Islamist conspiracy and so on. Where do we go from here? I mean, in my view, history is the best educator, and history, those who study history can study human patterns of behavior. We human beings often think that we live in unique moments in our existence. We think that what we confront is unlike any other, and what we've confronted or what our lives are unique manifestations, while in reality, it's remarkable how, as human beings, we often respond in the same ways, we repeat the same mistakes, we achieve the same victories and celebrate these victories over and over and over again. In many ways, history demonstrates how tedious human beings are, both in their failures and successes. But unfortunately as well is that we Muslims are not good students of history. Especially modern Muslims have not, but if history is any indication, I don't think that let me put it this way, and I don't want to prolong this talk further, but this is like all nations. This is that go through defining moments in their being and in their evolution. Not just the United States, but the West itself is going through one of these defining moments where they espoused certain ideological, philosophical doctrines, the philosophical ideology of liberalism and pluralism, and because the results have proved to be socially shocking to their psychologies, they are trying to find various ways to renegotiate these concepts so as to engineer the racial and ethnic and social results. In other words, liberalism, which is founded on a philosophy of openness and acceptance and individual freedom, there are movements like Trump and several others, and even the movements of Samuel Huntington and so on, what is at their core is that they don't like what liberalism produced. They don't like what openness produced. It produced a lot of diversity and it produced a lot of equality, and they don't like it. And they wish they could go back and change it. But they can't find a philosophical way to reconstruct liberalism so as to say whites can enjoy the privileges and non-whites get lost. So instead, they imagine these cataclysmic showdowns and a civilization based on Judeo-Christian values and Muslim in opposition and at war with Islamic values and so on and so forth. Whether we like it or not, this battle of identity is going to be fought using the body of Muslims as the sacrifice, the scapegoat. This is good and bad. What's good about it, well, actually, let's start with what's bad about it. What's bad about it is that whether in Europe or in the United States, and especially with the coming of Trump, considerable pressure to demonstrate considerable pressure exerted on and also from people like Barid Faris and Frank Gaffney and Michael Flynn and Bannon and so on, to demonstrate that this administration is in fact protecting the purity of the Western civilization, the purity of the identity upon which they claimed to be the heroes of. I mean, they came to power saying, we will protect you against the hordes of barbarians that are coming in and ruining us, our wonderful us. And what that will mean will be drastic changes in immigration laws. I expect that there will, from the get-go, and there will be a scratching of various amnesty programs that the most recent one that was initiated or launched by Obama. But there will be also a restricting of visa categories like crew members, a tightening of various visa categories, such as religious workers, R visas, various types of practical training visas. There will be a renewed effort, which, by the way, contrary to popular belief in the United States, you can legally do, to limit the to increase the number of immigrants from one parts of the world, such as Europe or Singapore or Philippines, and to limit the number of immigrants from other parts of the world such as Pakistan or Indonesia, Malaysia, so on, or Egypt. Already, refugee programs are in the doldrums. There are millions of Syrian and Iraqi refugees, and the number of refugees that we are taking are negligible, but I believe there will be even more tightening of that. But more than this, there will be some very serious test cases to see how far our society, our meaning Muslim and non-Muslims, are willing to let them go in subjugating and putting the Muslim element in place. And what I expect these test cases to consist of is to engage in some very well-publicized searches and seizures, very intrusive searches of homes of some prominent Muslim Americans. I expect that there will be a number of very prominent, and we can discuss these in questions and answers if you're interested, very prominent deportations of some prominent non-citizen Muslims in the United States. And critically, there will be a renewed effort, and I say renewed because these have been active in the legislature in several different times, but each time it's been quashed. One is the odious attempts to pass Sharia oath laws or anti-Sharia oath laws. What these are basically to require state employees to take an oath that in order to work for the state, especially, this is directed especially at the academia, is that you in no way believe in or support Sharia law. There's already been several efforts to pass these laws in California, and they have not been successful politically. But if you read the weather report, you can clearly see it on the horizon. And second is to bring back the one form of Muslim registry or another. I wouldn't put it too far off to say that someone somewhere might produce some excuse in some violent event not to detain Muslims in mass incarceration, because it's very expensive to do that, but to detain Muslims who symbolize to Muslims in the West a symbol of empowerment and integration or assimilation. What is very critical for this type of thought is to communicate to Muslims that unless you recognize, fully admit the superiority of Judeo-Christian values and accept that your only value is in fully embracing these Judeo-Christian values, not by saying they're consistent with Islam, but by saying that Judeo-Christian values should educate Islam, and Islam should humbly sit and learn from Judeo-Christian values. Unless you are willing to state things in that way, you remain on the margin and as an outsider to how they see their world. So it is not enough, and in fact, it's something that turns you into an enemy very quickly, to say, well, you know, those Judeo-Christian values, they're exactly the same thing as Islamic values, because that represents an elevation of the Islamic paradigm, and to them, by definition, the Islamic paradigm is seen to be inherently inferior. Now, final note, what to do. Like all moments of historical transformation, which is the positive side of Muslims being sort of the tapestry for this identity war, whereas the first battle is going to be fought. It's not the war where the war will be fought, but it's where the first battle will be fought. The war is going to be fought at several levels, with African Americans, with Asian Americans, with LGBT community, with but the first battle will involve Muslims, and Muslims will be sort of because they're the low-hanging fruit, and they're the weakest party, and the most incapable of defending itself. Like all these transformative moments, you have as many supporters as you have opponents. And often the supporters will be very cognizant of the battles that mean something to them. So the Hispanic community or the African American community is aware of the battle in terms of how it will pertain to them. But they're not necessarily cognizant of how the battle will pertain to you and your group. And it is critical that Muslims, I don't think appeasement in this situation, unless you are willing to go the track record of some who became humble, became totally subjugated subjects. I mean, they accepted a very diminutive and very degraded role before if you insist on a true pluralist paradigm and on principles upon which I believe this country was truly founded, equality and due process and freedom to all, not to one race, you must find your allies, and you must educate your allies, and educate your allies as to why when the battle is fought in your plane, in your territory, why and how this relates to their battle. In other words, we're first, but you're second, to put it bluntly. Second, this is a time, I mean, those who know me, those of you who know me, I have been preaching and I've gotten sick and tired of preaching because I often preach to the converted because the unconverted don't bother coming to listen to me. That it is time that Muslims grow up. There is no time for the ghetto-like mentality that plagues Muslim movements. There is no time for creating pretend universities and pretend media institutions and pretend movements. In other words, there are professional standards that are out there in the real world. And you either play with the big boys and girls, meeting the professional standards of the world, or you sit at home. But what you do not do is come and create your own little pretend universe in which you create a think tank that meets professional standards only in the Muslim community. But otherwise it would meet no standards at all. You do not create an educational program that only meets standards if they are defined as what's defined as relevant are Muslim standards, but do not meet academic and scholarly standards beyond that little Muslim ghetto. And in doing so, a very concrete idea that I think becomes very relevant in battles of identity, especially in the United States, courts play a critical role. In fact, this whole thing could swing on a couple of very key judicial decisions. It is imperative for families that have wealth, instead of buying their third Jaguar or their resort, I don't know where, or whatever rich people buy, is to create a legal fund. And that legal fund doesn't shell out for any lawsuit, but critical lawsuits that we can choose in cooperation with the UCLA and some other civil rights organizations that provides the best possible legal funding for lawsuits that are coming, lawsuits that will involve the arrests of some key Muslims, or the attempt to denaturalize some key Muslims, or the attempt to freeze the assets of some key Muslims, or the attempt to censor some key Muslims, and to make the cultural, legal, political history by making sure that these lawsuits are won and are receive all the necessary blood work that successful lawsuits require. Courts, like other periods like this in the history of the United States, I think will play a critical role in the next. I wish I could say 4 years, but I think it will be, unfortunately, 8 years.
No, please no.
Anyway, okay, thank you very much. I'm done.
Any question? Yes. We have maybe 5 more minutes for prayer. Just go ahead.
How do you see the interfaith of dialogue happening now in the large numbers between Muslims and Christians, the church? The interfaith dialogue. We have organized in the Islamic Center now. There is many groups interacting, and then they meet all of them and they take their input and what they have done throughout the different districts in the city of Irvine and Los Angeles. How do you see the interfaith?
Yeah, I think it's very. I think interfaith. The question is, how do you see interfaith dialogue, and especially on a large scale? I mean, let me. There's the interfaith dialogue is a broad term for various types of activities. Some of it where we get together in order to achieve mutual understanding of each other's faith and system of beliefs. That is positive in normal circumstance. In current circumstance, interfaith dialogue must evolve to let's agree that we're different, and let's also agree that our faith differences do not matter. And if you really want to understand our faith differences, we can share reading lists with each other. You know, you read this book, you read that book, and let's agree that what unites us is a common moral vision to combat racism and bigotry. And that type of moral commitment to fight on the same front, to stand together when the time for persecution comes, because it is not a. I pray I'm wrong. I mean, I actually do dua every single night that I am wrong. But I think persecution is, in my view, and again, I pray I'm wrong, is inevitable in the Trump administration. Because my reading, I mean, I know Walid Faris and Frank Gaffney personally and have had interactions with them. And Walid Faris and Frank Gaffney, I don't know Michael Flynn personally, and I don't know Bannon personally, but these two characters, who I know are free agents within the Trump administration. Free agents mean they go around speaking to various people in various positions, trying to egg them on to move, to do something. Both of them are characters that have I would describe it as a pathological hate of Muslims and Islam, and only seem to feel their own sense of power in the misery of others. I've had an occasion to work with both in cases involving anti-terrorism prosecutions or the detainment of individuals as material witnesses and detainment of Muslims as material witnesses in cases that claim to be terrorist related. And the angst that I saw on it was just shocking to me. And reading the cast of characters that are coming in, it's just a matter of who among the Muslims that are in the arena currently will be targeted first and will be targeted second. And it is critical that these interfaith communities, at a moment like this, they have to understand that dialogue is good, but dialogue must have concrete results in clear and unwavering support when that time comes.
I have a question.
We have a question here, please.
So to preface my question, first of all, Khaled, thank you so much for your wonderful talk. It was very enlightening. I think some of the key points that you made inform us in terms of what we need to go forward and do. To preface my question, I want to quote from an English historian named Lord Acton, who lived in the 1830s. He said, "There are two things which cannot be attacked in front: ignorance and narrow-mindedness. They can only be shaken by the simple development of the contrary qualities. They will not bear discussion." And so with that as a preface, and if what we're dealing with here is a narrow-mindedness of sorts, a willful ignorance, a politically motivated ignorance, and given that we as a Muslim community may be the first targets of their actions, do we now, what are your thoughts on whether we now stand up now ahead of the curve, make statements, come out in certain ways, or do we spend the time maybe in other ways where we are more reactive in nature when things do happen? So given our stature, given our strengths, given our weaknesses. So I'd like to get some perspective from you on that.
I mean, my view, and this is a very good question. I mean, nationalism is a form of ignorance in itself, because nationalism, by its very definition, you are committed to something that is beyond rational analysis or rational discussion. It has no rational reasons. Your passion is your passion because it's your passion. And it cannot be rationally deconstructed. And white nationalism is exactly that type of willful ignorance that you address. And you're absolutely right. I don't think that white nationalists can be responded to, because some Muslims say that, well, our role now is to educate them about Islam, and I think you would agree with me on this, is that when it comes to white nationalists, educating about Islam is nothing. But I think that I would be given everything. There are two really critical things. One is that I would not be reactive and I would be more proactive. And the reason for this is that it is important to send signals to our would-be allies that we are going to be targets, and we're here, and please ally yourself and incorporate us in your system of alliances. I mean, I'm rather surprised when I see many of the discussions about possible strategies in responding with legal challenges to Trump and the various things that the Trumpian administration might put into effect. I'm quite often surprised at the absence of Muslim voice. And I understand it, of course, because Muslims are absent from so much. They're busy hiding out in their ghettos instead of being proactive. This reactive mentality makes you scream out for help only in desperation. And I'll tell you something, is that when people, I mean, the same psychology of criminology applies here, is that it's one thing when you say, I feel at risk, please walk with me. You know, I feel unsafe, can you walk me to my car? Or waiting until you're under assault and then screaming, help me. When you're under assault, often people don't want to help someone under assault. They'd rather wait until the assault is over. And then, you know, and that's just unfortunately the psychology of social dynamics is, you know, once the attack gets off, it's much harder to find allies and to set up contingency plans in a state of desperation. The second thing I want to put here, it is really critical. I mean, again, this is one of these points I have been saying forever. We have remained an immigrant, we Muslims have remained an immigrant phenomena since the 80s at least. But there have been various waves of Muslims that have immigrated to the West and eventually were assimilated and completely lost in the past. It is critical that we have some very honest and serious discussions about who we put forward and how we assert ourselves in the public arena.